office. I wish to extend my appreciation on behalf of our acting dean, Dr. Wanwali Inping, to our friends and allies, namely Faculty of Political Science, Chulalongkorn University, Faculty of Social Science, Chiang Mai University, the School of Development Studies at Thammasat University, and the Faculty of Philosophy, Gajah Mada University, and finally, Faculty of Social Science, Asian University of Women, where our speakers are coming from these institutions to support this important panel. And finally, thank the team from Mephalung University, especially the Bangkok office, Ajahn Dr. Nishan, Ajahn Maya, and Ajahn Charuan, no? Who are trying to handle this event for all of us this morning. It is also a pleasure for me to share my passion of 2030 agenda and my enthusiasm for what the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or SDG, can do for humanity. Sustainable development as a norm has been accepted in literature ever since the publication of the Brundtland Commission in 1987. It is defined as a pattern of social structured economic transformations or development that optimizes the economic and societal benefits available in the present without jeopardizing the likely potential for similar benefit in the future. This recognition drove the adoption of the Universal and Transformative 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It is also key to agreement on the Addis Ababa Action Agenda on Financing for Development, the Paris Climate Agreement, and Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, among many other intergovernmental agreements and frameworks. That's why the 2030 agenda is committed to leaving no one behind. That's why we need to work together to find sustainable, durable solutions that recognize our interdependence with each other and all life on Earth. Ladies and gentlemen, at this significant event, let me emphasize that all right from the beginning, our school, with collaborations and partnerships, was committed to supporting the international development towards SDGs and 2030 global agenda by developing innovation on 5 Ps, as Ajahn Charuan mentioned a few minutes ago. It is important to recall that SDGs are not just an additional plan for the world, nor do they replace the specificity and detail of existing international agreements. The SDGs are a shared vision of a world of globalization puzzle. Localizing the SDGs is another crucial prerequisite for a successful pandemic recovery and for returning to the path capable of achieving the SDGs. Localization is critically important in our region as well. The megatrend of rapid urbanization, climate response, population growth, and demographic change are just some of challenges that we can see today. Last year, we saw the importance of subnational and local governments in helping the national and global attempts for containing COVID-19, getting relief from those in need, and keeping essential services functioning. International development will only grow stronger if we make a resilient human development as a key security platform to pursue regional sustainable development, especially sustainable development framework. Our concept of sustainable development will need to include health security, climate security, addressing inequality, upholding human rights, and good governance. Understanding the linkages between peace, sustainable development, and humanitarian action. However, we need a better enabling environment that allows subnational governments to better contribute to national SDG agendas. Ladies and gentlemen, this hybrid panel is an initiative of our School of Social Innovation at Bangkok, or what we call Bangkok office for short. The main objective is to generate the debates on environmental protection and social justice and how SDG agenda impact people, planet, prosperity, partnership, and peace, with the paradigm shift in sustainability discourse. This hybrid panel will be a place for gathering idea and experience among representatives of international scholars and experts on sustainable development in Southeast Asia. The panel will allow for active involvement of all participants in generating debates on theoretical and practical levels of sustainable development goals. I also thank our supporter, Heinrich Bold, Sipsung Southeast Asia Regional Office, for a great support in this event. Our Mae Fah Luang University is committed to supporting the active participation in partnership, cooperation, and dialogue. Also for the School of Social Innovation to provide the main platform for our young people to work closely with international organizations and multi-stakeholders in international development. This is an opportunity to mainstream cooperation and collaboration in all areas of academic partnership under the SDGs and 2030 New Global Agenda Framework. Our School of Social Innovation at Mae Fah Luang University, both in Bangkok and in Chiang Rai, is already to offer all our cooperation to support. And I wish you a very successful future. I look forward to hearing to our fruitful discussion as a voice to reflect on the academic ideas. With this, it's my honor to welcome all of you to the hybrid panel and open this event. Thank you very much. ขอบคุณครับ
Thank you so much, Dr. Charongrat Charansi, as you deliver the opening and welcome speech. So here I would like to continue our schedule. And before I introduce the first panelist to come to talk about the people, may I introduce all of the speakers to the audience first? For the first speaker, Ajahn Associate Professor Narumon Thapchumpu. She is an Associate Professor in Politics, Department of Government, and also she is also the Deputy Director for Research Affairs Institute of Asian Study, as well as Director at Mission Research Center for Migrant, and also Executive Committee in a Master of Art and Doctor of Philosophy in International Development Study at the Faculty of Political Science, Chulalongkorn University. For her education background, she received her bachelor degree in Political and Government from Faculty of Political Science. And later on, she get her master degree in government from Chulalongkorn University. And then she flew to the UK and she received a PhD in Politics and International Study from the School of Politics and International Study, University of Leeds, United Kingdom. And that will be her academic background, the summary of her academic background. And for the second panelist is, maybe it's not in order. And the second panelist is Associate Professor Dr. Makio Oishi. He received his PhD and his master from Bedford, and his bachelor degree from Kyoto University. Associate Professor Dr. Makio Oishi is an associate professor of peace and conflict study in the social science program at Asian University of Women, Bangladesh. Since gaining his PhD in peace and conflict study at the University of Bedford in 1995, he has been involved in research and publication on conflict management, focusing on the Asia-Pacific region, knowledgeable in the world, major spiritual and humanistic tradition. He is interested in developing a holistic approach to conflict management and conflict transformation in Asia country, as well as seeking a regional security order reflecting the rich culture, value, and norms of Asian Pacific. Among his recent publications are two edited books. The first one is Contemporary Conflict in Southeast Asia Toward New Asian Way of Conflict Management, published in Springer 2015. And the second one is Managing Conflict in a Globalizing Asian Incompatibility Management Through Good Government, published in Springer 2019. And that is the brief background of Dr. Oishi Sensei. And we have our next panelist, Dr. Chaya Wannaputi. Now he is a lecturer at the Department of Geography, Faculty of Social Science at Chiang Mai University. Dr. Chaya's background is in human geography, with special attention to relational geography, landscape, and science, technology studies. He is interested in the idea of nature-culture relation, especially the human dimension of climate change. His research explores what everyday weather and the so-called climate change culturally and historically mean in Thai and Southeast Asia context. His recent research involved ethnography study, interview, developing games to try to tease out what people think, talk, and do when the weather become abnormal based on their livelihood and culture. He also explored the making of climate change knowledge and policy in context of Thailand. Lately, he became more interested in the idea of Anthropocene and more than human, post-human geography. And Dr. Shaya, he received his bachelor degree in geography from University of Leeds, the UK. And later on, he received master degree in climate change from University of East Anglia, from the UK as well. And then for his higher education, he earned his PhD in human geography from King's College London, the UK. And that is academic background of Dr. Shaya. And the next person is Dr. Nathawikom Pantuwongpakdi. And Dr. Nathawikom is a multidisciplinary environmental researcher with private sector, academia, and civil society organization in developing country. At SDG Move, Dr. Natawikom roles, including researching on the progress of SDG both within Thailand and the global level, assisting other researchers from different sectors and promoting public awareness. Additionally, Dr. Atawikom worked as supporting researcher for the Urban Future Project at Thammasat University. One resilient to the climate change in the Bangkok metropolitan region. Dr. Natawikom is a holder of a joint PhD in geography from King College London and the National University of Singapore with the concentration on resilience and disaster adaptation. And for his master, he received his master in water and environmental management from University of Bristol. And for his bachelor degree, he received it in chemistry and as well as geography from the University of Washington. And that is his academic background. For next person, he traveled pretty far from Indonesia. We have Dr. August Wayudi, Dr. August Wayudi. He is now an associate professor at Faculty of Philosophy and Center for, it's a little bit hard to pronounce for me. If there are mistakes, I apologize in advance. Pencasila study from Gajah Mada University. And for his education background, Dr. Akas, he received his bachelor in philosophy from Gajah Mada University, Yogyakarta. And later on, he received his master. He have 3 master degrees. The first one is in sociology from Gajah Mada University. And the second one is in international relations research from Research School of Pacific and Asian Study, Australian National University, Australia. And another one is international relation from International School for Humanity and Social Science, University of Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And later on, he received his PhD in Political Science and International Affairs, Northern Arizona University from the United States of America. And that is his academic background. And I think we have 5 of our panelists already. So right now, may I introduce our first panelist to come to the stage, Associate Professor Dr. Narumon. Please come to the stage. And here, let me remind all of you that all of the panelists, you have 20 minutes to talk. And the Q&A section will be open after we finish all of the panel, all of the topic. And we are also have a live streaming on Facebook page, Asian Study, Mephalwang University. Please check it out. And for our first panelist, Associate Professor Dr. Narumon, she will come to talk under the theme of people. And she will be talking about how does SDG agenda impact to the livelihood of local people, as well as how the paradigm shift in sustainability discourse for the people. Now I will shift the screen to Dr. Narumon. For the audience from on-site, both on-site and online, if you have any question, please take note. And after we finish all of the topic, we will open the Q&A section.
Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone please welcome Dr. Narumon ค่ะ
ค่ะขอบคุณค่ะ
Sorry. What did I? Sorry. Do something. Sorry. Just change the speed. I'm listening to something. Yeah.
Recording in progress.
Since we have other panelists who are at on 2015, we talk very little on SDG. What we really happy is the ASEAN community, especially ASEAN economic community. That time was very big thing for the region. Hope that, we will achieve SDG anyway because we have high prosperity. Those who talk about prosperity may also have to answer me that, okay, do we achieve or not? But ASEAN 2015 at that time, talking about regional trend, regional economy, and high expectation for regional trade and prosperity. We talk very little, or maybe yes, maybe in the agenda meeting talking about SDG goal. During 2015, at that time, the SDG or global idea to achieve and for the better or sustainable future. But at that time, the meaning of better future still cling on economic growth, cling on regional prosperity, and sustainable future at that time, saying that how are we going to maintain prosperity of the economic growth that we thought the regional community or economic integration from the region will create. And I think this is the thing that we may have to bear in mind, that what we think long time ago. What happened during that time? For me, they were competing agenda, especially look at the region and especially looking at Thailand or the Mekong country and the mainland. At that time, for us, the compete agenda is between how to make people mobile, how to support the mobility of capital, how to support the mobility of product, of goods, and maybe some put restriction on the mobility of the people. But anyway, at that time, the agenda for the economic integration is really looking at the so-called corridor. And I would say that the idea of the corridor have not changed. Right now, we heard about another corridor, right? The corridor is still working, even though during the COVID-19, you cannot move. We have the of the movement of the people, but capital mobility is still working. We can still use a lot of the flow of the product, the flow of the capital. So this is the first agenda that has been continued from 2015 up until now. The second agenda is the one that we talk today. We're looking at the 17, the sustainable goal. And for me, when I was asked to talk about the people, when we talk about the people, which indicator that we look? Normally, many people looking at the poverty, some even looking at the issue of the equality, especially gender equality, and some even talking about the SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. The interesting part is that for ASEAN, we are more interested on the SDG 8, decent work and economic growth. But for us, economic growth is bigger than decent work. So that's why we see a lot that on the issue of economic growth, and we see really few on the decent work. So for us, the income generation, the generation of income is more important than the distribution of income. And that is the problem that we face during the time since 2015. The second thing, I think for the poverty, we might argue that the country in ASEAN can achieve the issue of reducing poverty. And I think it is a goal of every government in this region that try to do that. However, during the COVID-19, and today is 2022, we might have to re-examine that whether the issue of poverty, do we need to reconsider what happened to our people? And the economic growth, do we achieve, and what happened for the decent work? And for me, I would like to ask another one indicator for us to consider is the gender equality, because these three indicators is very important for the people. What happened that we come for us as the people since the SDG has been practiced from 2015, and the ASEAN community also taking shape with the economic prosperity. One thing that we found out is that even though we were achieved on the poverty, we reduced the poverty, we increased the income, but in terms of inequality, we can see that we have been seen, the higher of the Gini, and that indicate the inequality among the people. And I think I'm not the economist. I think those who work on that will help me to answer that what have been wrong. Why Thailand become top 10 of inequality in the world? After we saying that we will achieve with the SDG goal, try to reduce poverty. At that time, people talking about not only reducing poverty, but also reducing inequality. So what happened to us? I think every government try to attract foreign direct investment. So the investor going to industry going to agriculture, forestry, aquaculture, seafood, whatever. But however, what we see when we try to persuade foreigner to pour capital in the field, the mobility of capital still go to the area that make the best thing is the profit. So I think our 5P might forget 1P, the profit. I mean, actually we have 6P, and the P profits may come before people. And I think this is happened that maybe SDG have to admit. So what happened since the capital, the mobility of the capital due to the economic growth go to the place that can gain the most profit? So we see the increasing of transnational migration. For me, even I'm from the Department of Government and teach migration. So migrations as development issue, we have been seeing that throughout, I mean, more than 10 years, the million, I mean, at least in Thailand, more than 2 million come to work in Thailand as for the work with the 3D, dirty, dangerous, and difficult. I think the situation also takes place in Malaysia. And we can see that during, I mean, after post-COVID that we can see, Brunei, I think we also see. And the country for the sending country like Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, also, we can see another experience. But we can argue that among 10 countries of ASEAN country, the transnational migration takes place in the last decade and is increased economic growth. But will such economic growth can come back to development of the sending country or not? Or will the people share benefit from the economic growth? And I think this is a problem that we see that. The other thing that we have seen, this is something that we talk and we didn't, I mean, we might argue that we prepare, but not much. I think those who will work on the SDG environment may argue that at the end of the day, you cannot compete the nature. You already talk a lot in the last, 10 years, 15 years. You already saying that we have risk management, we manage with the disaster, we can overcome the flood in Bangkok, the flood in Thailand, the flood in Vietnam, in several countries during that La Nina, which seemed to be a long time ago. But I think the recent disaster with the pandemic already tell us that you still not yet achieve to compete the nature. And I think with such economic growth, one thing that not only impact from the, redistribution of income, the issue of inequality, the disaster and risk management still the big issue that such the economic growth still not able to solve. And that one thing, since we are talking with the post-COVID, I still have to do ATK test in order to come here. So let me talk a little bit with the COVID factor. The COVID factor make our people, so vulnerable. The economic growth stopped. Thailand got deficit, 2-digit deficit, minus 12 in 2020 due to the COVID. And up until now, we have not yet recovered. Otherwise, we might not seen that. I think Thailand already tried to open the country. Other countries already open. Even though we talk about the number of the people who are infected by the COVID. During that time, the Chulalongkorn University did 3 research. The research looking at the migrant worker with the seafood sector, with the garment, and also another research that working with the Mekong country, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Myanmar, and South Korea. The key finding is very interesting. Women is the most vulnerable. Female migrant workers face the most difficult time during the pandemic because they are the one who will be unemployed. In comparing between male and female worker, they receive low wage. Why they receive low wage? Not because of not follow minimum wage, but we pay minimum wage only the day that we hire her. So basically, she might receive 3 days a week for work. So at the end, so it's around 15 days for income with the 30 days for expenditure. So that's the issue of the COVID-19 impact factor to the people with the less access to healthcare and very risk to be unemployed. So that's the COVID factor. To save the time, I'm going what the ASEAN country try to do. Oh, we have a lot. We have so many framework to dealing with our people. We're talking about to reduce the poverty, to reduce inequality. We are going to solve the problem. Several countries come with the legislative framework. Several countries come with the institutional structure. Several countries come with the national policies, and many even talking about we should integrate with the national development strategy. So even with the COVID factor, we still hope with the dream for development strategy, even though we already understand that we have uneven development during the time. So what did we do? Thailand have the repeating again for the cabinet resolution. So the Thai government extend work permit. So you can see 1 year extension, another 1 year extension, another 1 year extension. And those who work with the migrant worker, you will heard that, okay, this is extension, but the work permit extension doesn't solve the problem because you still have to deal with the visa, you still have to deal with the bubble and seal, you still have to deal with the no job. I mean, it's no point of work permit because you don't have work. And that's the issue that, I mean, many countries face. And I think with that, during that time, many countries already have experience with the no or less prosperity in terms of the economy. So what did the country come out? This is such a framework that the Ministry of Higher Education, since we are from the university, let me talk with the Mahesi, the Ministry of Higher Education, already proposed with the framework for poverty and inequality. Their framework talking about increasing capacity, increasing opportunity, and provide choice. They're even talking about social protection, risk management, and start talk with the participation. However, I did the research with such a framework. The framework is very interesting that in order to reduce inequality, you will reduce poverty, which is quite clear. That's happened in Thailand. They're even talking about political sphere, economic sphere, and natural resources sphere. One finding come out that access to land, access to resource, access to, I mean, clean air, and also the environment, natural resource is important. But however, looking at the funding, the most funding that coming to solve so-called poverty and inequality, going to the issue of the increasing entrepreneurship. The so-called occupation doesn't mean that you provide job, but it means that how to reskill, upskill, or skill to increase the occupation. But that may not be the answer for the issue of inequality or poverty, because many people are already talking about what the state should do to make sure with the social safety net, what the community should do for the social capital. One thing that I learned from the COVID factor is that those who are under social security fund still survive after the COVID, because you still get some compensation, at least 62%, even though you are unemployed. But those who do not have social security fund, you are just become individual bankruptcy, and that's happened. And I think for the migrant worker, more than less than 10% are under social security fund, especially the small scale, enterprise. And that's the problem to the people. Even we have the good framework, the fighting still not yet that what we want. And the more important, I think if the Thai government start talking this issue, one thing that we may have to look at that the research project that always come to the area. If we talk about unit of analysis, it's always go to the macro policy, macroeconomics. But when we look at the local area, the city or the province like Mae Hong Son, Narathiwat, Pattani get less funding. And they are the one who are top 10 of poverty comparing in terms of Thailand. So that's the question. The second one, this is another top hit. Another very interesting framework is the UNESCO, talking about inclusive policy. Many people come with such frameworks, hope that this will make our people better, because we should do in terms of the partnership between the market, the space, and the service that increase ability, opportunity, plus dignity. The interesting part is related to politics, sin and from political side. The space is the big important, but it's less important when it go to the policy maker. The policy maker really focus on the market, but the market more closely looking at the, private enterprise rather than what the government should help in terms of the access to labor, land, credit, or housing. And the social protection that's supposed to be the service from the government, we see very little. Information sharing still, many information still, monopolized by those who are in power. And we don't need to talk about electricity. We already pay the high price, and transportation, education, health, and others. So this is a kind of the service that's supposed to be the role of the state. The market's supposed to be in the role of the private enterprise and also those who are dealing. And the space, the thing that we found out that they have a certain country that are able to survive or to solve with the inclusive. But for the country that still believe that the knowledge should come from the center, they are with the concentration of power from the centralized, this inclusive policy lab have not yet, it's still in the lab. It haven't gone out to the society. I think the other thing, this is civil society competition. They propose with the framework. They still believe with the, civil society, with the association, propose with the demand and the, idea to propose with the change. But if we see the contentious politics, the issue of less peace, more conflict, we might see that this framework can come if the state is still function, or if the state listen to the people, or the core institution is happen. At the moment, I think the issue of the cooperative negotiation is more than associational network and the civil society to propose and to compete. And if we see some example in case of Thailand, we might smile to see that the same-sex marriage passed the parliament yesterday on the first, row. But when you look into detail, the important thing that they debate is the issue of the legal entity in terms of heritage, in terms of the one that affect the issue of the finance. So for me, this framework maybe work for civil society, and it will work if the country open the space and with more democratic. But the country that's still under authoritarian, this framework still, a long way to go. My last slide and last framework is the medical framework. The health team after the COVID, they propose me with they come out with the word social determinant of health. And very interesting for me, I have to admit, this is quite interesting framework because rather than talking about health issue, they are still talking about other factor with the status factor, which is effect in terms of the migrant worker, looking at the lifestyle, community network, and including with the legal, hygiene, work, living condition, employment, food access, COVID literacy, and housing. This is a framework that the health and medical team, which is they were the front line that dealing with the COVID. And one thing that they are coming out and answer me when the COVID decline or at risk reducing, they're saying that in order to change from pandemic to, endemic, the first thing is not only about the number of infected or the number of deaths that the government proposed on the news, but how to create the socio-economic, cultural, and environmental condition work, because that's the key prevention. And I think this is, when we were looking at the people, one factor is the issue of unemployment, and that's still coming. We might have less problem in terms of the food access, but the living and working condition with the work environment is still very important. So for me, the social determinant of health model maybe need to be really, if those who are interested to work on this issue, I think the post-COVID team or those who would like to look at the SDG in the post-COVID, maybe we might have to, adapt on a certain framework that I present to you before, that which one that it will be able to make us achieve with the SDG. Conclusion. Yes, we got economic growth, and then we have the economic stagnation now or sooner to become. Many people and every people in ASEAN saying that it will reduce poverty, it will solve inequality and social problem. My question is it true? Because what we see that growth was achieved at the cost of greater inequality. We see the inequality between the country. We see the inequality between a group of the people, and we see a certain high unemployment on the country that have lack of attraction to the foreign direct investment. And to support the growth, we have to weaken our democracy in order to bring more investors. We have to sell our cultural identity, or we may also increase consumption, because we have to sell things. Right now we don't have anything to sell except the nature. And I think that's the very important, that this growth achieved at this cost, and will we be able to pay that? So my ending is that to end poverty and hunger in all their form and dimension, and to ensure that all human beings can fulfill their potential in dignity and equality in a healthy environment is still in question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Narumon. It seems like she raised many interesting points so that we can debate later on sustainable development. And here, let me summarize a little bit of her talk. And Ajahn Dr. Narumon, she come up on the stage to share about the SDG and the people. And she point out quite interesting that if we want to see the livelihood of quality of life of people, there are two important indicators. The first one is poverty, and another one is inequality. And inequality is including gender, distributing of income. And also, there are also the factor that can also affect the livelihood of people, which is the impact of disaster and how the government manage risk management. And right now, as we all know, COVID-19 impact our life a lot. And that the COVID-19 not just only impact the life of Thai citizens, but also the migrant that work in Thailand. And she also introduced us the framework to understand and how the framework trying to approach to manage those kind of situations that happen. For the first, actually she introduced several framework, but here let me mention the one that she give a detail. The first one is SAT inclusive framework. This one is quite interesting. And another one is the UNESCO inclusive policy lab. And another one, which is the social determinant of health mental. And this that I mentioned here, she said that this is the framework where if we wanted to understand and manage the those indicators that she mentioned before, can be the framework that we can set to use it. And later on, she concludes. Let me conclude in a very short one, and let me borrow her own Ajahn Narumon word that to have a quality in livelihood, we should reduce poverty and also reduce inequality. And this is from Ajahn Narumon. Okay. So next, I would like to invite Dr. Chaya to come up on the stage. And Dr. Chaya is our second panelist that he will be talking about planet. And he will be talking about how the SDG agenda impact the policy of environment and how the paradigm shift in sustainability discourse for the planet. Climate change is one of the issues that is very a hot issue right now that we have to discuss. So, okay, I think Dr. Chaya is ready. So now I'll give the time to Dr. Chaya.
Hi, good morning. First, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to Heinrich Böll Stiftung and Mafalung University for supporting and inviting me to be here. It's a great pleasure to be working with you all. So, I'm speaking on behalf of the planet and about the planet. Okay, and these are the two questions that I got asked about the SDG and the policy, and also the paradigm shift. And I'd like to say that these two are almost the two sides of the same coin, right? I would suggest that the way that we create our discourse or our perception to the environment shapes the way we design the policy to regulate our planet. And at the same time, the way we come up with these sets of policies shapes the way we think about the planet. And I'm going to show you a series of sets of policies and discourses. And then we can ask how SDG could learn and take advantage of these things that happen over 100 years. So maybe about 100 years ago, right, there were two kind of schools of thinking: to conserve or to preserve the nature, right? But whether we want to keep the forest for using them as timber for building our houses, or we want to preserve them for aesthetic reasons, it tells us that both of them, we think of the environment as service to people. Either way, it's for utility purpose. Right? So that's one of the first key movements of environmental thinking. But then later on, around 1960s, 70s, when we started our Western environmental movement, right, there were publications and series of scholars thinking of the earth being fragile, the earth being limited, of being finite, and that we have to stop or reduce our consumption. The population was growing too fast, perhaps too much that the natural resources could handle. And so we have to control our utilization as well. And then we have a more advanced way of thinking in terms of calculating or measuring the amount of resources that we use. And then we come up with the idea of footprint, ecological footprint. How many planets are we consuming already? And just more recently, we have the idea of planetary boundary, saying how much are we destroying this planet in different aspects, in terms of climate, in terms of water resources, in terms of air pollution, and so on. But all of these thinking, showing that we are seeing that the environment could be used as an indicator, right, for how sustainable or unsustainable we are doing to this planet. And it shows us that at the same time, we are trying to engineer not only our behavior, for example, in terms of personal carbon credit, but also trying to engineer the planet itself. We have different technologies, for example, like carbon capture and storage, putting all this pollution from the air down to underground tunnel, for example. And that is a very different, almost advanced technological way of thinking. And then we have a different way of thinking, saying that the environment is no longer controllable, right? No longer we could engineer it. Then how could we deal with it? Then we have to make our society stronger. We have to make it adaptable, more resilient, because we cannot stop spending, we cannot stop using. Then we have to deal with our own, the impacts that we are creating. And so we have this idea of the earth is becoming a tipping point. And also that in order to deal with that, the city has to be more resilient, for example. And the picture showing here people rowing a small boat perhaps could be a sign of the earth being uncontrollable at the same time. And people are trying to adapt in their own ways. Whether or not it's successful, we can debate on that. And then, as we all know, 1990s, the later 2000s, the environment become a very, very crucial idea of us to really think about economic development. Like Ajahn Narimon just said, that in order to grow, in order to get out of poverty, then we need to spend more. But by spending more, we are using more of the natural resource. And that is unsustainable, as this 1987 conference that came up with the idea of sustainable development, right? But it's not just sustainable development at a local level, it's at global level. And that is the first time that we are dealing with things at global level, right? And then when we think more about our own development path, then we think more deeply into how far have we gone wrong in terms of capitalization, or trying to get out of capitalization. Whether we could get out of that or not, I'm not so sure. And then we perhaps could think about our history as well, that actually colonization has also been part of why we are here. Sugarcane plantation, cotton plantation, or mining of different minerals at a global scale, international trading has put many groups of people at a very disadvantaged position. Poor people, women, and so on. So the environment and critiquing the idea of development then got us to think much deeper than just local unsustainability. It's about injustice, and this is probably the most issue that we are focusing today: injustice and environmental unsustainability. And also, in relation to that, it got us to think about our ethics towards the planet. Where are we in terms of human and nature relationship? In 1987, when we had our first definition of sustainable development, we were thinking, some group of people would think that the environment could be traded, could be substituted for economic growth. But then, another group would say that actually no, because society depends so much on the resources. And so we have to first protect them. So we have this debate of weak and strong sustainability, right? But then could we really get out of this binary between, nature and culture? Some people would even go further, saying that the planet would still be a planet, still, right? With or without human, right? And it would just be a different planet, a planet that is inhabitable for people, right? And so there are different ontology, different philosophy, different ways of thinking. How do we put ourselves in relation to the planet? And this philosophical thinking then results in the way we try to govern the environment, results in the way we try to design the policy to regulate our behavior and also the society and the environment. So what could we learn from these things? And I'd like to suggest that, the environmental problems that we face today could be called the wicked problems. And these are the following characteristics. First, it's becoming more uncertain, right? We know that by trying to cut down the forest, it affects the atmosphere, it affects the biodiversity, it affects the ocean and so on. It's the butterfly effects. And this is not enough. Our society is also becoming more complex by growing, by using globalization, capitalism, and so on. And so there is an environmental problem is also created by society, right? It's not just environmental problems alone, right? And having the two together, it becomes a very, very complex system. Second thing, and I think this is the most important thing, is that currently we have many different ideas of sustainability. As I have shown you so far, right? We have the engineers who try to control, engineer the earth. We have social scientists who try to think radically about development. We have economists who think about how do we deal with prosperity versus natural resources. And with different groups, with different ideas of thinking, leads on to different decisions, different ways of acting on the planet. And also we have different sets of beliefs, different age group, different gender. And so there is no single way to solve environmental problems, right? We need a very different way of thinking, and that perhaps leads to the word democracy and justice. Okay. And next to that is that we have different sets of knowledge that we could try to harness and also trying to design our policy. And so the governance, the form of governance will require much more openness, a more pluralism style of thinking, right? Rather than what we have here I would say it's more technocratic governance, a very expert-led style of environmental management, whether it's air pollution, whether it's water problems, or even climate change. Okay? And so to govern these wicked problems, it requires what people call clumsy solutions. Clumsy means it's not a direct solution. We need an indirect solution. We need an institution that would be more open to different sets of ideas, that institution that we could learn from different way of thinking, right? And we think deeper in terms of time. So we think of the past history of colonization, for example, and we think across scale in terms of the connections between local, regional, global scale. Places that are near connected to places that are so far away. Okay, and these are kind of situation that we are in now, and I think SDG has a very good position in harnessing these clumsy and messy problems that we are having. I'll give you perhaps a few examples. So Chiang Mai and Chiang Rai as well, every year we are facing PM 2.5, a haze pollution problem. And from the research that I've been working, people were trying to focus too much on reducing air pollution, right? But air pollution is not, the pollution doesn't just come out of the air, right? It was connected to the forest. It was connected to land. It was connected to agriculture. So SDG is flexible enough to let us play with the way we could design our policy. I break down into three different building blocks, let me say. So in order to think about haze pollution or PM 2.5, we have to think more than just air pollution, right? SDG 15 and 13 talk about the land, the forest. And so actually we are talking about access to land, access to forest. Who has the rights to go into this land rather than just, controlling the air pollution, right? And then we need Department of Forestry to be working closely with Department of air quality, for example, right? But that is not enough, because why would would land be so important? Because it's related to farming. We in the city, we consume so much chicken, so much pork, so much vegetables. And where do we grow them? We grow them in the rural area. Right? We grow them up in the mountain. So it's connected to food security. But food security doesn't come just by growing things and there we have food. It's about how do we regulate lands? How do we give access to farmers, right? How do we consume sustainably? How do we grow these products sustainably? Okay. And so it's not just about growing food and that's all. It's about how do we get farmers to have a good life and so they could farm for us. And how do we consume sustainably so that we could make the farming less a problem. Okay. And also it's on the green building block, it's very, very indirect way of solving the problems, but it tackles with the everyday issues. When we talk about land and farming, right? Actually, we are talking about who is managing the land, and there are different groups of people. There are not just Thai people. There are different ethnic groups who know their forest, who have their own way of cultivating the lands. There are people who are still doing shifting cultivation. There are people who are doing intensive farming. So we have to respect their knowledge, respect their rights, that, give them the power to manage their land in their own ways, rather than reducing their access or controlling the way they farm. Okay, so education, environmental education is important. Gender inequality is also important because not only male farmers we need also female farmers, because they have to, like Ajahn Naruman said, they have to do many, many things, not only farming, right? And women is very, very crucial. Also, we need environmental funding, more funding definitely, and in Thailand is not very well known for that. And also support for environmental movements. Right now, a lot of environmental movement has been thought as unpeaceful, but is that a case or not? We have to rethink this very, very carefully. So, if I'd like to end it with the quote by the two scholars, who thought about climate change, but these could apply very much into many aspects. We need sets of indirect policies, right, that tackle everyday issues rather than trying to focus onto just one particular environmental problem. And that is a better way of providing equality, reducing inequality, providing environmental justice, for sustainability. And this is, I think, the way SDG was designed, and it's the way that we should go on forward. Okay, and that means, theoretically, yes, but I'm not sure practically it's possible or not. If we could redesign institutions, right? Different departments of water, forestry, air quality, and so on. We need to work together rather than work separately. Okay, so thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ajahn Chaya, for an interested talk about the climate change. And it's quite interesting to me because when he gave a lecture about the SDG and also our planet, it's quite interesting that he started with showing us how to understand and think of environment and also show us the flow of understanding environment. Let me summarize this to you. So the way to understand or thinking about environment in the beginning is as service to people. And next is environment are thinking as fragile and finite. And later on, environment is understand as indicator for how we manage or how we use environment. And then later, environment is understand as chaotic or uncontrollable. We cannot control the environment. And later, environment is understand as interrogator of economic development. And another one is that the environment is, when we're thinking about the environment, we can think it as interrogator of ethics or the mode of governance or how we manage or use environment. And he showed that they're also weak and strong point. And when we're talking about how to manage or understand environment, it's not just only one way to manage it, but the SDG help us to rethink about how we govern our environment. And later on, he showed us he used the example of haze pollution. We face a lot in the northern part of Thailand, especially Chiang Mai and also Chiang Rai. And when we think about the air pollution, he proposed that we don't think just only about the pollution itself, but we have to think about, the tackle that in a small issue of everyday life. For example, when we think about the air pollution, you can think about land and also forests, or how people can access to use the land, and also the environment movement. And if you all can remember that one of the slides that he break down into a small SDG, I think that's quite important and help us to understand how we could govern the environment and how the SDG help us to rethink about how we govern the environment. And thank you so much, Ka Ajahn Chaya. And right now, I think it's time for our break.นะคะ. We will take a break for 15 minutes and we will come back to this room again. Ka. So what time is it right now? So it's 10:30. Please come back here at 10:45. For the audience on site, we have break outside.นะคะ. Please